Hello, my name is Diane, and my TBR has gotten a little too long for my liking. I typically try to keep my TBR very small to the books that I am the most excited about and take books off as I lose interest in them or my taste changed or I've read something similar and realized that I don't actually like that setting or that theme or whatever. But my TBR is constantly changing, constantly adding things, constantly taking things off. And right now I have about 40 books on my TBR, which may not sound like a lot to some people, but it feels like a lot. And at least half of those books are first in series. So if I do read them and enjoy them, they're not going to come off of my TBR. They're just going to get replaced with a sequel. So I've decided rather than trying to read through my TBR one book at a time, I'm going to decide what I want to keep on my TBR one chapter at a time. I'm going to be reading the first chapter from each of these books and then deciding, based on just that first chapter, if I want to keep them on my TBR, if I'm still actually interested in reading them at some point in full, or if based on that first chapter there's nothing really engaging me in the story, whether it's the writing, the characters, the plot. If there's nothing that's really intriguing me after getting through that first chapter, I'm probably just going to take it off my TBR. I know one chapter is not really a lot to judge a book on, but I feel like at this point I've been DNFing things earlier and earlier. I used to try and give a book about 100 pages, and then it started to feel like 50 pages was probably enough. I could kind of tell at that point, especially if it was a shorter book, if I was actually going to like the book. And now I feel like if there's nothing interesting very early on in the story, I'm probably not going to love it, and I would much rather move on to something else that I might love. So I'm going to go through my entire TBR. I'm not going to give these books too much of a chance, but I am going to give them a chance. I just think I know my reading taste and what actually appeals to me well enough at this point that based on one or two chapters I have a good idea of if I'm actually interested in continuing into a book or if it just doesn't seem like something I'm really going to end up loving. There's just too many books out there. I don't have the time to read them all, so I just want to be reading the ones that I'm actually excited to be reading. And that doesn't mean these books aren't going to come back on my TBR at some point in the future as my taste continues to change. But right now, I want a slightly more curated TBR. So when I go to pick a book, I'm actually excited about all the things I'm looking at and not just like, oh, that's a lot of books, because that's kind of how I feel now. And it's more overwhelming than exciting. So that's enough explanation. I'm going to go read a chapter or two and then I'll come back and tell you what's going to happen with all of these books. Okay, so I've read chapters from 4 books so far. I started with the books that I own. The first book is The Vagrant by Peter Newman. I've had this for ages. I read the first couple of chapters of it and it sounded really interesting. Pretty vague premise. It's about this guy who is known as the Vagrant, and he is traveling to some city with a sword, and he has a baby with him for some reason, and he also has a goat. And that's pretty much the whole setup. He doesn't speak as a character. I don't know if he ever speaks. This is the first book in a trilogy. The writing is very descriptive, but it also feels very detached from what's happening. And I just don't know if I feel very engaged in what's going on. I also kind of just want to know where it's going, but I don't feel like I really want to go there. So I think it's finally time to just give up on this and take it off my TBR and also take it off of my shelves. The next book I tried that I started a long time ago is The Dwarves by Marcus Heights. I actually didn't read a chapter of each of these. The Vagrant, I ended up reading 2.5 chapters because they were very short chapters. These other 3 books had pretty long chapters, so I kind of just read until I felt comfortable saying, I want to read this or I don't want to read this. This one I read the first section of the first chapter, and I was enjoying it. I wanted to keep reading it when I got to the end of that section, so that to me means I want to keep reading it. That's kind of how I decided this. If I felt like all I have to do is get to the end of this section and then I can stop reading, I think that's a good sign that I probably don't want to read that book. And if I get to the end of the section and I want to keep reading, I say, oh, maybe I'll just do one more section. That's a pretty good sign that I want to read the book. And that's how I felt with this. I wanted to keep reading when I got to the end of that section. So this is about a dwarf who was abandoned and he is now being raised in a human society. There are no other dwarves around. He's not really sure where there are any other dwarves, and he's living his life with the humans, and I'm pretty sure at some point he gets sent somewhere that leads him back to dwarves. I don't really know what the actual plot is other than it's about this one character, but I enjoyed the writing. I liked the character. So I am going to keep reading this. Then I have The Black Company. This is the bind-up edition, The Chronicles of the Black Company, that has the first 3 books. This one especially, I got to the end of where I decided I was going to stop because the chapters are fairly long in this. And I did want to keep reading. I actually did read another section, but then when I got to the end of that one, I wanted to keep reading again. So I think I'm definitely going to keep this one. I know that it's about a mercenary group called the Black Company. That's pretty much all I know about it. It's a relatively long series, so I think each book just covers a different thing that the Black Company is doing. I don't really know the specifics about this. I've heard good things about the series. Sounds like something I would like, and after reading the beginning of it finally, I think it's going to end up being something that I enjoy. So this one is staying on the TBR and staying on my shelves. And the last book is The Thief's Gamble by Juliet E. McKenna. I actually have the whole trilogy, and it's been sitting on my shelves for a while, and I've just never picked this up. I know it is about a thief, and that's all that I remember about it. But this had a very long first chapter. It was almost 60 pages, so I did not read the whole thing. But I read enough of it that I just kind of felt like I wanted to stop reading. I don't know, I just wasn't enjoying the writing. It's written in the first person, but it's a lot of the main character's thoughts, but also describing a lot of the things happening around the main character. So I think it was that it was written in first person that wasn't working for me, but I'm not really sure. But in any case, I just didn't feel very invested right off the bat with the main character. And when you're that in a character's head, you kind of have to like them. I don't even know if I didn't like them. I don't think I read enough, but I didn't want to read more. So it's coming off the TBR. So those are the first 4 books, which I'm 2 for 2 at this point, which feels good. I feel like I should feel bad about not wanting to read these books that have been on my TBR for so long. It does feel good to find books and say, I actually am interested in reading these. They've been on my TBR for a long time, and I would like to keep them there because I still have interest in them, but it also feels good to say, I don't think I'm interested in this anymore, and take them off of my TBR. So I've got a bunch more books to do this with, so I'll check back in when I've read some more. Hello again. It's the next day now. I read from 4 more books this morning, and again, I have half of them that I'm going to keep on my TBR and half of them that I'm going to take off. So the first one was The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is a fantasy mystery where it's compared to like Sherlock Holmes, and this investigator and her assistant, I guess, are investigating a murder, obviously. The man was found with trees growing out of his body, and that appears to be what caused his death. This happens right at the very beginning of the story. So I read until the assistant found the body and saw what was going on, and I think I do want to continue reading that and see what's going on with that. It sounds interesting. I liked the writing. So that one's staying on the TBR. And then I read Malice by John Gwynne, which I feel like I've read the first chapter before, but in any case, I liked the writing, and it sounds like the type of book that I would enjoy. So that one's going to stay on the TBR. And then the other two are The Navigating Fox by Christopher Rowe, which I haven't heard too many people talk about, and it is very short. I think it's about 150 pages. But what I have heard about it have been good things, but I just don't know that I loved the writing style. So I don't think I'm going to keep that on my TBR. I'm going to take that one off. And the other one is The Fireborne Blade by Charlotte Bond. And this was similar. It sounds interesting. I haven't heard many people talk about it at all. And the premise sounds interesting. It's about a knight who, she did something that she needs to redeem herself for. I don't actually know what she did or when in the story that's revealed. But she goes to try and defeat a dragon and get the fireborne blade as a way of redeeming herself. And this is something that many knights have tried to do before and have been unsuccessful at. So she thinks if she can do it, she can make up for whatever she did. In the first chapter, I actually skipped ahead to the second chapter. The first chapter is like a different knight's account of what happened when he tried to do this, and then it goes to our main character in the second chapter. So I read a little bit of the first chapter and then a little bit of the second chapter, and I just don't know if I really liked the writing. I just didn't feel very interested in what was going on. It sounds like a cool premise, but I don't think I'm going to end up reading this one, at least not now. So far I've read from 8 books. I've kept 4 on my TBR. I've taken 4 off. I think I'm just going to do a couple more and then wrap this video up. Hello again. I read 2 more books, and I'm going to keep both of them on my TBR. The first one is Saevus Corax Deals with the Dead by K.J. Parker. And it's the first book in the Corax trilogy following Saevus Corax, and he is like a battlefield scavenger. And I liked the writing of it. I've heard good things about it, and I enjoyed what I read from it. So that one's going to stay. And the other one is The Silverblood Promise by James Logan. And that one is about a guy who lost a duel, I think, and now he's a disgraced heir. And then his father dies, and he goes to investigate his death and hopefully redeem himself. So that one's also going to stay. For this group of 10 books that I did, 6 of them are staying on my TBR. We had The Silverblood Promise, Saevus Corax Deals with the Dead, Malice, The Tainted Cup, The Dwarves, The Black Company. And then for the books that I'm taking off of my TBR, The Navigating Fox, The Fireborne Blade, The Thief's Gamble, and The Vagrant. Well, let me know if I took any books that you think are wonderful off of my TBR that maybe I should reconsider. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap this up here because I think 10 books in one go is enough to talk about. I am definitely going to do this again for more of the books on my TBR until I get through all of them and really pare down what's still on my TBR, what gets to stay permanently. But that's all for me for now. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.